everyone. It is 6 o'clock. Welcome to the special meeting of the Bethel Board of Finance. We will start our meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join me. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. First on the agenda is the consideration of the Board of Selectmen for the Rockwell and Johnson School projects. Hopefully we'll have an update on this ongoing project and maybe even some positive news. I'll turn it over to our Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Cronin.
Yes. Thank you all for allowing us to speak tonight. So I think I sent you an email. Mrs. Yansky and I have been to the State Department at least 2 more times, I think since our last meeting. And they have both been extremely positive. I think at the last meeting we had talked about the fact that they were very pleased with the modifications we made to the Rockwell project. And for those of you that weren't there, staying within the envelope of the building, which greatly reduced the cost of the project, and they also verbally committed to us, and I think I sent an email afterwards, that they're going to be recommending to the commissioner. What is Melanie Curry's?
Commissioner
Thank you.
Melody Curry.
Yes, the Department of Administrative Services to give us the space standard waiver, which is huge. So that likely could be another $2 million in savings down the road for the Rockwell project. We then had a meeting, this time we didn't go up there, we had a phone conversation with Johnson and looking at the Johnson project. And they asked us there to look at some of the square footage of the Johnson project. And because we were within 5,000 square feet.
We were close
Correct.
to meeting
the space standards waivers.
Exactly.
So we did some modifications in the design, brought down some of the common areas. We were able to reduce the overall square footage only by about 3,000 square feet. But it brought us to the point where they were happy with our project there. And so they verbally committed to us with Johnson also that they would allow us to have a space standards waiver, which would ultimately kind of result in more savings to the project down the road.
For the very slight amount that would
Correct.
be over.
It was not.
Yeah.
With Rockwell, it was a big deal. With Johnson, it was only a slight difference between those two. So that was very, very positive. So, you know, they asked us to, at this point, just to write the formal letters to Commissioner Curry to speak about the, to formally request the space standard waiver while we're submitting to get on the priority list. So I think there's really no question at this point. I think it's certainly Mrs. Yansky in my mind about the fact that we are going to be placed on the priority list with pending a passing referendum, clearly, and secondly that they verbally committed to the space standard waiver. And I didn't actually have an opportunity to tell Steve Harding that, but so those are really, really positive things in the end.
And then in the meantime, behind the scenes, ONG, we updated the overall number that to that 65 and change number, but we have to go back and update all the details behind that. So just 2 days ago, at the end of the day, I did get an email from ONG so that I can go back through our application and I have to make the updates to it and then just send it up to the state. But it's not a big deal. It's just make them by hand and send them out to the state.
So that's where we are with the projects in terms of the state and working through that process. But if it's okay, Mr. Chair, could I have Steve Harding come up and join us?
I have one question for you. You said you got verbal agreements.
Yes.
Is there any way that we could get these agreements in writing?
We will be. We just have to submit the letters to them, and that hopefully is the next phase that they get approval through the commissioner. So I anticipate that we'll probably do that in the next couple of weeks.
Yes.
Was there any cost savings on Johnson, the 3,000, or not, was it?
Very little, there is some, but very little, but to make all those, we have a number that's already going out. What we won't spend would just not be
Be
used in the
savings to the
project.
community.
It'd be savings to the community.
Do you have a better sense of what you think our reimbursement will be if everything falls into place?
We're working towards getting the 45% of eligible costs,
So what's that? I know 65 million, what's that number actually?
It's in your motion. It's in your motion.
Yeah,
It breaks it down, the actual percentage. in the
yeah,
motion.
it's closer to it costing Bethel closer to 40 than that 46 million. Correct. So that's our goal. I mean, you don't know the exact numbers till actually the project's completely done and all of that, but we're aiming to get this down. Yeah, I mean, right now we're sitting at like 42 and
Correct.
change, and then with the waivers and things, we're aiming to get down to 40. Right now, it's sitting at the numbers that we gave you, so I really can't make up a number, Brian. I have to give you
Right.
what we really have to do. So
You could try. It's not like I'll hold you to it, right?
Yeah, you guys are the Board of Finance,
You want me to put it in my ear?
Yeah, so right now, under the 65,831,143 total project, the estimated net cost of the town is 42,245,448. That is before they process through the space standards. Okay, so a goal would be to get a lot closer to the 40.
Right,
You know?
and when it's all said and done, it could be under 40 anyway, because
could.
short-term bonds we could pay down.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah, but in terms of the amount that would need to be bonded.
So, I guess in summary, working through the Office of School Construction,
Right.
we're in a good position. They've changed their whole process. I've been through it before in other districts, and they're being a lot more cautious about what they're doing. They're getting districts in, they're making sure that they have all of the information is accurate. They're really trying to work with districts to avoid notwithstanding legislation, which we've talked about before, which is going to actual legislation to try to get space standards. They have, I don't know what he referred to me as, the energetic superintendent. He said something.
He did have a comment one day.
He did.
Well,
And you better not ask me for anything
all
else.
the work that's been done and this very energetic superintendent from Bethel.
So I really do feel like Bethel's in probably the best position we could be in right now through the Office of School Construction process. So that's where we are with in terms of that. Is it okay if I have Steve? Steve, do you want to come over?
Yes.
I invited Steve to
Dr.
come.
Carver, I'm sorry, may I ask
Yes.
a quick question? What's the rationale for waiting the 2 weeks before sending in the official letters?
Well, we're waiting on just one bit of information from the another division of the Office of School Construction on like new status.
That needs to be included in the letter.
In the letter,
Yeah.
and I just haven't heard back. I talked to the architect again today, and to see if he had heard back from Kermit, who's another gentleman in the Office of School Construction, and he hadn't heard back from him. So I'm going to pursue it tomorrow with our main liaison from the office, Michelle Dixon, and or go to Costa Diamenta, who's in charge of the Office of School Construction.
They also will want those forms I need to make the changes to, so
All that has
tomorrow
to be
it's on my schedule to make sure I get, like I said, the night before last, the changes came to me, so I've got to get those. They want the application updated too. They want everything
in
updated.
order,
In
so
order.
that it's ready
So
to go.
I've got to get that done tomorrow,
for the December 15th
so that I'm not holding
deadline.
up her letter.
So
We're
that's
waiting on some information from a
Yes.
third party.
a third party, correct.
Got it.
So I asked Representative Harding to come because I'm sure, I'm sure your big question is, what's going on?
What's
with the
going
state?
on?
Yeah.
And you just left there literally, so we
Right.
appreciate that. And then just talk a little bit about school construction.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll speak in regards to whatever the board wants me. I speak at your pleasure because I'm here for you.
All right, do you have any updates at the moment for what's going on with the budget?
Yeah.
And
So-
with school construction.
Yeah, so there was a budget that was passed would fully fund the schools and fully fund all municipal funding for Bethel in particular.
ECS money you're talking
Yes.
about? Okay.
Oh, yeah. Well, if you combine the ECS and the increase that we would get in special education funding, it would be a net equal to what we received last year for the first fiscal year. And the second fiscal year, I think we actually had like a $200,000 increase. So it's far from perfect, but at least it funds the schools, which they need the funding for. Unfortunately, the governor vetoed that budget. And we were up in discussions yesterday today in regards to override, which unfortunately was unsuccessful. So now the next stage in the process is trying to figure something out within the next week or so. The good thing about today was that leadership in the House did indicate that something would be done, or there would be a discussion in the chamber formally within the next week or so. This should have been done 6 months ago, in my opinion, but nevertheless, it seems like there's something that's at least imminent moving forward. My hope is that with a budget that passed that reflects fully funding local municipalities, that will help negotiate a budget which reflects that and does pass and does have a signature from the governor. And frankly, from my position, I'm not going to accept anything less than that. This town needs to move forward in a proper direction with the proper funding. Most importantly, we need to get something done so you here can move forward on next year's budget as opposed to worrying about this year's budget. And I think the first thing that leadership and my party and other parties need to talk about when they get in a room, and I've conveyed this multiple times, is that if the governor wants to make structural changes to educational cost sharing, if he wants to make structural changes to different municipal funding aspects, fine. I may be against them, I may not like them, but do it next year, in the next fiscal year. You can no longer have, the problem is you've all created a budget, passed it at a referendum, sent out tax bills, moved on with the school year. We're a month and change into the school year now. There's nothing we can do if you want to cut us mid-year. You want to cut us, I might not like it, I'm going to disagree with it, and I'm going to be vehemently against it, but at least be fair to the town and let us prepare for it in the next budget cycle, as opposed to throwing on us in a current budget cycle. It's just unfair and it's ridiculous for any government official to expect that out of a town. Nevertheless, that's where we stand now without a budget, but it sounds like within the next week or so, there could be something coming. The majority leader had mentioned today, actually, that maybe we would vote on just a revenue package, just agree on a revenue number. So whatever our revenue number was, evidently in the budget that passed and then the alternative proposal from the majority, the revenue number was the same for what we collected in revenues. We had a difference of opinion on where to spend that revenue. And maybe having a vote strictly on that revenue number so the governor could operate with that revenue number as opposed to the revenue number he has now in front of him, which is far less. The problem is with that, though, as you've seen with the governor's proposal, if we leave that revenue number without any direction of where to spend that money, we see where the governor wants to spend his money, and it's not in local communities like this. So that's unacceptable as well. There needs to be a package passed where the funding to local municipalities is clear and it's out of the governor's hands, because it's clear when it's in the governor's hands what his decision is for local communities like here in Bethel. So that's an update on the budget. If I can, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead with the school funding.
Yes. So in regards to the school construction, I've been in constant contact with both Dr. Carver and with Larry and many other Board of Education members. And I will say that I have been so impressed by the leadership in this regard. Very many times in Hartford, when projects need to be funded, it's like, oh, by the way, the last day of session, can you get approval for that funding? This has been something that has been very proactive on the Board of Ed's part and in the administration's part, and I want to thank them for that and the hard work that you've placed into doing this. The one thing that I'll say is I know the current budget status has a lot of individuals in town, all across town, being a little speculative about moving forward with a project or approving a project. I understand that, I respect that, but the problem is this. One of the things that the governor specifically noted in his February address to the chamber was that in addition to the ECS funding changes that he wanted done, And we're all evidence of what his executive order was and the impact that would have on our ECS, which is 0 to Bethel, which is what his executive order would be. He also mentioned that he wants to make significant and substantive changes to the school construction bill. As of right now, we're on a priority list with DAS, which seems to have pretty much informal to formal approval of the project, which is fantastic. My fear is that might be one of the last projects that are formally approved under the current system. If we wait any longer, we might end up into the new formula that the governor wants to create, which would, I think, have a huge hamper on local communities and basically would throw it back on local communities to fund these efforts completely on their own without any state help. So that is a legitimate fear for those that have that fear, and I just wanted to express that.
All right, I have a question. Everybody asks me, if the state is on the verge of bankruptcy or whatever, where is this separate fund of $450 million? Where is that set aside?
It's in the budget.
It is in the budget package, and it's also part of bonding as well. So when the state sends out a bond package, some of these projects are involved in that. But it generally is set aside in the state budget.
So we bond our portion, and then the state in turn bonds their portion.
A certain aspect of it. I can't tell you exactly how much what they bond of it. I think some of it is out of the general fund, and yes, some of it is bonded on the state side.
All right, let's go down the line. Brian.
One, I appreciate what you're doing for us and
No, thank
the
you.
towns that you serve. I guess the hardest thing for me is kind of grappling with the reality that we're going to get cut something. I know you're optimistic that the governor's pretty insistent that he wants
Yes.
a cut from municipalities. And he's going to continue to cut. So it's just how do we weigh that out, and when do we get a sense for what that cut is and how much we can save through your savings that you've outlined, what we could do to tighten our belts just so we don't put ourselves in a real bad financial situation. At the end of the day, we all agree the schools need to be done, but we're honestly looking at potentially an $8.2 million cut to our budget,
And
which is huge.
right, and Brian, I don't think your fear is unwarranted. That is the executive order. The executive order would be $0 in ECS funding to the town. There's no way to sugarcoat
But
that.
where were the Democrats at? Were they at 3.5?
So yes, exactly. So what I was going to say, and you made a good point, was that the executive order is a 0 out to Bethel, but the Democratic compromise budget would have given Bethel somewhere in the ballpark of I think $5 million in funding, which would have
Yeah, we were
been
2.9
roughly
million.
yeah.
To the school side.
To the school side.
2.9.
Yeah.
So roughly a $3 million cut. And I think that it would be fair that if the governor was willing to sign that into law, that would probably be the number if a budget is
This year.
created. Yes. Yes.
One of the things that I have heard as I've been listening to testimony and reading different things, the governor's vision is down the road, there will be no ECS. It'll gradually go away. And that cost, if it's been static for us over the last 10 years at $8 million, you can count on that not being there, along with some other things that he believes the town ought to be funding differently. One of that is the construction needs that you have. If it's 47% today, because of our wealth factor, it's 45%. The new number is 30. And different definitions, different criteria that have to be met. And if you want something other than what is going to be dictated to you, go ahead, pay for it, do it, but you pay for it. So that's two things. The other thing is we did do a cost estimate of what it's going to cost if we don't get approval, what it's going to cost if we vote it down, or what's the likelihood of us having to maintain these buildings over a period of time, and that is upwards of $29 million over a 15 to 20 year time period. A lot of that is going to have to be done by referendum, and and have to be bonded, and you have debt cost involved in that. You know, it's kind of a confluence of nasty kinds of decisions that you have to make, and we've approached this from, this is our best opportunity
Do you have
to
a sense?
maximize the money that we can get.
Do you have a sense? Last meeting, you said that you guys identified approximately 1.4 million.
1.3.
Yeah.
1.3. Have you identified anything else in case we really
That's where we stand right now.
want? You're still at 1.3.
Yeah.
You think that, although it would be unfortunate if the worst case scenario happened, we'd be able to.
Oh,
Well,
That's
it's
bef- yeah.
18% of our budget, Brian.
I understand.
Yeah.
But what's 8 million, you know, to the town? I mean, that's a huge,
Yeah.
huge number. I get the numbers.
Yes.
It's wrapping my head around, okay, we gotta come up with 8.2 million. And kind of like we're saying, people have already set their family budgets for the year. And now they could be facing, some people could be facing $3,000-$4,000 depending on what they own in town. Or it's just, we have to be, and again, I support your guys' project, but I want to be realistic about it too. And how do we go about this so we don't hurt people in the town? There's a lot of people hurting right now, like I said, who've set their budgets for the year and who live paycheck to paycheck. That's the reality. So how do we do it? And obviously, we're going to have to come up collectively and find a way where we can cut costs all around to make the impact as minimal as possible to the taxpayer.
The trick is going to be, how big a hurt do you want to have? Because it's going to be a hurt over time when ECS goes away. They haven't dropped this idea of us picking up the pension liability costs.
It was actually in the alternative proposal.
Yeah.
And what was that, Larry, to us, 2-point-something million?
1.9.
It's a little, it depends on how you look at it. So the governor, his original teacher benefit shift was 1/3 of all costs, just automatic. Then what changed was then in his compromise budget, he had offered the shift, but it was 1/3 of current employees. You wouldn't have to make an obligation towards the retired employees. So I don't know what that would mean for the town, but there are two different teacher benefit shifts.
So Steve, you mentioned before, so we had this conversation just the other day, including Bob Kozlowski and Matt. So there's the $8 million number, which I don't personally think is where we land. And then there's the zero impact, and I don't know that we would land there either. But the governor did put out a revised
Compromise budget.
compromise.
Yeah.
So is it fair to say that that would be the worst case scenario at this point? Because
Yeah, I think it would. Obviously, nothing's written in stone, and I've learned one thing from my short time up there, that nothing is guaranteed.
Yeah.
And so I want to be safe in saying that I think it's a fair statement. It's a fair statement, and it's probably it's a reasonable statement. I was flabbergasted in his first proposal, which zeroed out a community like Bethel, which is so diverse, which I don't see as one of these communities that are so affluent they don't have to worry about any state funding. That's ridiculous.
Correct.
And so the fact that he even offered a $0 budget in ECS funding is ridiculous to me. Nevertheless, with that said, I think that is fair to say, because I think at some point it is realistic that within the next week or a couple weeks, based upon what the majority leader said today, that a revenue budget would be voted on, like I discussed before. And my inkling would be that if a revenue budget was voted on, which I still wouldn't like because it still puts it in the governor's hands to decide where to spend the money, I would assume that he would go off the revised compromise budget, which would give Bethel roughly $5 million in funding.
Yeah.
So I think that's a fair statement to make. There's no guarantees because we don't have anything intact, and it's exactly the reason why we need to get something intact and need to do it now. But nevertheless, yeah, that's a fair statement.
Would the legislature then move forward to the expenditure side, or would you stop at that revenue mark?
I think that the legislature would then come back to the expenditure side later on in the year at some point. Because the problem is that I don't think the majority leader saying that is saying that he doesn't think he can get a compromise. I think we can. But that's kind of, I think that, the expenditure would come at a later point. And I that's why I disagree with it, because what's a budget without placing a framework on what's important? That's a budget. That's what a budget is. It's not just a number, it's some sort of framework on what you believe is important and what's not as valuable. And so it basically is useless if you just give a number, especially to the governor who seems to not want to fund these communities.
So my last question is just quick. So your position is, I mean, originally when we talked about the educational costs, Sharon, you weren't sure how you'd want to proceed if we lost it. Your position now is, even with the cut, you want to continue forward with the project?
It is, and I don't want to speak for the board, but I know a lot of the members are here, and we had the conversation about it. And I think it really comes back to what Larry was saying, is that, this is a horrible time. I think we all agree about that. But it in terms of the reimbursement for the town of Bethel, this will likely never be back. And so we feel like at this point that, it is a risk. We understand that. But I'm not sure that there's going to be better options down the road. And that's what we talked about. And we kind of believe it. And believe me, we struggle with it. We really do. We did struggle with it. We had long conversations about it. But that's where we ended up, even knowing there might be a potential $2.9 million.
And I'll say, if I can, from a state perspective, I just said there's no guarantees. I can guarantee you that we're not going to get any more money in reimbursement going down the road. That the number that we have now is the highest number we're ever going to have, and there's no possible way within the next decade that any number is going to be any higher than what we have now. In fact, it's almost guaranteed that it's going to get lower as we go further and further down the road, if anything at all, if any reimbursement at all.
Yeah.
There are 3 or 4 different sidebar occurrences that could help. One, the largest teacher union in Connecticut has filed a lawsuit against the governor for cutting.
CEA.
Yeah.
Yes, CES. For cutting
CEA.
education the way he did. The other one is the Attorney General supposedly has found upwards of $264 million worth of illegal kind of deductions within what the governor is doing. And he's questioning those, whether those are appropriate and proper. And then you have COST and CCM, both organizations speaking out against the damage that this will do to small communities. And that's got to bring a lot of pressure, and that pressure is building. And we're trying to add to that, but it's going to take people screaming and yelling and knocking on the door to say you can't do this. What are you trying to do to Connecticut? You're going to be here for 1 more year and then you're gone. Thank you very much for the legacy.
All right, let me go right down the line here. If anyone has any questions or comments for any of our 4 speakers here, Bill?
Yeah, I have a comment on the construction projects, and I'm looking at Bethel over a maybe 25-year period, and I really think that considering that kind of a view, we should go ahead with the construction projects for the reasons that were mentioned today. That being said, my other question is, since the state is essentially shorting the towns with traditional funding, is there any discussion of the state backing off on regulatory requirements for the town? And the reason I ask is there's always complaints that there's a lot of reporting and things that we do that we wouldn't normally want to do except it's required by the state. And I have a lot of faith in the administration of our educational system that they could make significant savings and streamline if it wasn't for certain state regulations. And I'm wondering if that is coming up for discussion at all.
It has.
It has. I mean, and that kind of came with both proposals. I think the legislature has finally realized something that it should have realized decades ago, that people sitting in a room in Bethel, our fellow neighbors, know better about how to educate our students, how to run our towns than a bunch of bureaucrats in Hartford. And I think that that's essentially what's been happening over a couple of decades. So there is some mandate relief that has been discussed. Yeah, that is a topic of discussion.
Great, because I think it's not the whole answer, but I think
No.
it's a partial help.
There was some rollback in this last legislative session,
There
of some
was.
of the professional development requirements. There was a little bit back off of the data security.
It was delayed. It
Yeah,
wasn't.
it needs to be, Steve knows how I feel about that, it needs to be repealed. But, so there was some things that were done on behalf, I mean, there's still a lot though, I'm not gonna lie, there's still a lot that are required, but there has been some peel back.
All set.
Good question.
Cynthia?
First of all, I support this project. I admire your zeal. I know your passion. And I'm just stuck on a couple of things. And, we have a governor who's using his pen as a weapon. And we have so many uncertainties that it's almost like, it's really like a lot about hoping. And, I'm not really big on hope. I know that we had someone present the delta between doing it now and waiting. But I just know that if that funding doesn't come in, there are people who are going to have to literally make an extra mortgage payment in order to pay a supplemental tax bill. And I have been talking to a lot of people lately. And the general feeling is, with my constituents anyway, people who are retired, maybe 60 and over, they're saying, they're not libertarians, but they are saying, I already did that. I did that and I want to retire now and stay in Bethel, meaning that they raise their kids and send them to school. And they're not really that keen on jeopardizing their own wherewithal to support a big project. This couldn't be the worst timing unless, you couldn't even write a movie like this. It's like Towering Inferno. It's almost like an entity that has to eat itself in order to survive, which is crazy, but that's what it feels like to me. It feels like that it's like a hedge fund. Like we don't even know where it's going. And when Steve said nothing is guaranteed, that's just where I keep sitting. It's nothing is guaranteed, but nothing in life is guaranteed. But I tend to kind of go the way I think it's going to go. And the state of Connecticut has not given me one single reason to trust them. Not one single reason. And I know that you guys are up there all the time, and Christine is vivacious because I've seen her vivacity and it's all great. I just don't trust anybody. I don't trust that if you even got it, that we'd get paid. I just don't. And it's just a thing where, I'm just going to say, worst case scenario budget without the construction even, a lot of people are going to lose their jobs. A lot of people in the schools are going to lose their job. So this is what, if you're talking about feelings, I'm talking about my practical mind. So if you're talking about feelings, I would feel bad if somebody, administrator or an office person lost their job. I'd feel worse if a teacher lost their job. But I'd feel the worst if a 75-year-old couple had to move out of Bethel or their house got foreclosed on because their taxes just zoomed into outer space. I would feel worse about that because they're older and they don't have the same resources as maybe younger people do. So there are so many issues here that have nothing to do with the renovations. I'm just saying I'm really struggling with this. I voted yes to push it forward to the public hearing because I felt that the people needed to weigh in. I don't have that many questions because we know pretty much everything about this. And, we're in the best position for the school renovation. We're in the worst position for operations, for our operating budget. So I get it. I get it, I'm just really struggling. I don't have any questions, I just want you to know I'm struggling with this.
Okay, thank you. Brian, any more?
I'm good.
Bob?
I want to start by thanking the speakers for coming today and giving us additional information. I want to also recognize and acknowledge the concerns that have been raised. They're valid. We have to consider them. I would, though, encourage folks, these are without doubt unprecedented times. We have lots of challenges kind of coming together all at once. We really haven't had to deal with that before. So it is a very difficult, challenging time. I would just encourage folks to be calm and to take in information as we continue the decisioning process. I would just take exception with one description of we know everything. I think we know very little, or there's certainly a lot more information to come down the pike. And I think we're doing a disservice to the very citizens of Bethel who are trying to serve by making a decision without having all the information. And so I'll finish my comments by saying I think we've had a Board of Education who are our subject matter experts. They've looked at this every possible way. They've given us their recommendation. We have to accept that recommendation as being the best thought through. And we as the Board of Finance need to be kind of patient, get all the information, and make a decision that's fully informed without jumping to conclusions based on lack of information.
Thank you. Tim?
I don't have any questions. I took in everything you said. I missed a few meetings because I was traveling, and I understand. I'm for it because it's needed. Again, it all comes down to a question of can certain people in the town of Bethel afford it still, and can they afford to stay here? You know, it comes down to it. To me, it's the ECS money. You know, whether it's zero, we get nothing. We get the $8 million. It's still good. But our taxes are, even if we got the $8 million this year, you think we're getting it next year? So there's, again, I think we're all kind of struggling with the same thing. You're damned if you do, damned if you don't. It needs to be done. It's going to cost more down the road, you know, over 20 years just to repair it, you know, and now we're getting, you know, like new. So I think we all see that, you know, and I'm sure there's more information that'll come, but most of it, unfortunately, has come from the state. You know, with the funding that we're going to get, that's the part that I struggle with. You know, to make any kind of decision, because our job is basically to spend the taxpayers' money the most frugal way we possibly can to get the biggest bang for our buck. So right now, that's just where I am. There's really no questions.
Gary? All right, I have a couple of questions. As far as I know, and as far as I understand, the ECS money is divided into quarters, am I correct?
Well, the payout during the course of the year.
Okay. And it was issued on October 1st, and we would normally get a check sometime in October, November, is that correct?
Late October, right, Bob?
October 28th of last year.
So it looks like perhaps we will not get anything at all this October. Because we have passed the first quarter, we're into the second quarter now of the fiscal year. And that's going to create an issue within the next few weeks, is it not?
An issue as far as what?
If we don't get this $2 million that we had expected.
Last year was how much, 3.8?
The first payment's usually around 4 million, sorry.
4 million.
Half of it.
And it comes in 3 segments usually. Since we usually get about 8 million, it's usually the first one is 4, and then we get 2 that are $2 million each, approximately.
So there are problems on the immediate horizon, are there not? If we don't get 4 million by the end of October.
It's gonna hurt the cash flow.
Okay. All right, so, and then in the second quarter, which is October, November, December, we start our budget process at the end of December for next year. And we haven't even solidified what we're gonna do for the next couple of months. So like everybody said here, we are certainly in a dilemma. We certainly are. We're going to take all the information that we can. We're gonna process it, we're gonna discuss it, but like you said, this is uncharted territory. It really is.
Could I just say one quick thing that to clarify, you couldn't possibly know more about the project. That's what I meant. We don't know anything about what the state's mind is going to do, and that's the frustration. That you know everything, all the practical stuff, all the permutations and the dimensions and everything. I did ask a question last time, and I don't know if it was followed up on. I was wondering if there's any flexibility whatsoever in that deadline.
No.
And there just isn't.
November 15th.
Okay. Hey, you ask,
Yeah.
you don't get.
Bruce, can I ask Bob a question?
Go ahead.
Bob, let's say we get hit with the governor's proposal, and the governor says you're gonna lose $3.5 million. We know over the course of 6 years, this will add 1.2 mil, depending on what the grand list grows or whatever. It'll come out to about 1.2 mils over 6 years. What will that 3.5 million equate to in the mill rate
Well,
immediately?
it's probably gonna be about a $370 increase in taxes for the average home.
So what does it come out to in mils, like 1 mil?
We divide that 3.5 by 1.8, so it's a little less than 2 mils.
2 mils.
That's if we don't make reductions.
Right, exactly. And there's
Which we
plans
have.
in place, both on the town side and the Board of Ed side, we
Right.
don't want to implement those plans, but there's plans in place to try to mitigate the effect on taxpayers. Doesn't mean that everything's going to come from the taxpayers' dollars. We may have to adjust the budget at this point, to compensate for that. There is a fund balance there, and we can use part of that for capital improvements. Capital improvements that are already built into the budget, move it to capital non-recurring and use that money to fund roads or whatever.
Only 1 year.
But it would free up money that's in the budget
Right.
on our side.
Well, it's just important for us as a board to have all that information,
Yeah.
to say, hey, listen, and again, I'm not holding anyone to numbers. You're saying, right now, you've identified 1.3 million. If the cuts go deeper, we may have to go a little bit deeper. The town could come up. It just makes it more palatable for someone like me, who just, and I'm being honest with you, that's just the way my brain works. I see numbers and I just look at it and I go, okay, well.
But it's become a moving target. Every day you hear different stories.
Right, but I'm just gonna go with, my gut is worst case is probably gonna be 3.5 million. If the governor agreed to 3.5 million, it's probably what he has in his head. He's not known for being a guy who compromises that much. I mean, look what he did to a bipartisan budget. He just basically said no because it's not what I wanted. So if I just know, all right, we're looking at 3.5 million, we can probably cover 2 million of that, and the mill rate, the tax increase is gonna be much lower to the resident. It just makes it more palatable for me to throw my support for it, rather than saying, okay, well, you could lose 8.2 million and there's nothing we could do about it. Because then, to me, it would be a dead issue, and that's nothing personal with anybody. You're talking about a huge increase in the mill rate. So having those numbers before we go to referendum, that, hey, we have these plans in place, this is where if we need to be, and we assume a number of 3.5 million, which I think you felt was kind of a safe worst case, at least we come in prepared and not, we've done our homework and we can make a decision to say, yeah, all right, well, it's gonna be painful, but we can do it. And this is gonna be the impact to the taxpayer.
Yes, go ahead.
Procedurally, I just have a procedural question, maybe it's for Marty. Right now, the town meeting is scheduled for the 10th, correct?
A week from tonight.
Correct. So once that happens, assuming that it gets pushed to referendum, you can't stop it, correct?
Correct.
Okay, I just want to say
Yeah.
procedurally, that's what happens.
I have a question for Bob quickly. To Brian's point, is there maybe this exists, but is there a way that you can break it down for us as far as mill rate increases for each scenario, even if it's a question of like a million or
Well,
something?
It's a very simple calculation. You got 1.8 that represents the value of a mill. So you take
That
2
was-
million,
that's
3
with no
million, 4 million,
adjustments.
divide it up,
Right.
and multiply.
We understand it's simple, but I'm saying
Yeah,
that
we
the
know it's
school,
simple.
the school identified 1.43 million.
Right.
I'm not adding 100,000. I don't want you guys
Yeah.
thinking
Right.
I'm not doing the Jedi mind trick on you.
I'd
Okay.
like to clarify for you.
we've already
Those
made-
are in place.
Those cuts are in place.
Those aren't identified to be made.
So if it was
Those
a
are in
3.5,
place.
we're
That's
at
what I
2
didn't
point,
understand.
we'd be
Yes.
at 2.1 now, correct?
Yes.
It would be at 2.1.
Correct,
Yes, we made those changes.
already,
All right, so we're at 2.1 if it was a 3.5
correct.
million. And on the town side, Bob, we've identified, is there any number in your head where you think where it doesn't dramatically?
Probably around 600,000.
So we'd be looking at about 1.5 million. So under 1 mil.
Correct.
Okay, so that's for this year, this budget that we're
I
in
get-
now.
I get-
I know, I just want to clarify this, that's for this budget that we're in now.
That's right.
Next year, we have to find, if all these numbers, is $3.5 million in the budget that we're gonna start working on in December.
Yeah.
Correct. All right, what I'd like to do, I'd like to proceed, if I can, with our comptroller's report. But before we do, I'd like to thank our speakers and all your sincerity and all your patience with us. It's appreciated, much appreciated. Thank you very much.
Now, you need to watch what is happening in Hartford, because what they haven't addressed yet is the taxation on hospitals. It has to be done next week, as I understand it. There's also an October 15th date that I heard that may be tied in not only with those federal funds that they're seeking, but also a need to get this budget done, because they're getting a lot of heat from a lot of people.
And the governor did say at his press conference this afternoon that October 15th was the date.
And I don't doubt that. But what my fear is that what the budget's gonna be is just a revenue number.
Which gives them complete control.
All right,
gives
let us, thank you very much. I do appreciate it, and we will see everyone again on next Tuesday, 7 o'clock at the high school for the special town meeting, am I correct? Okay, very good, thank you.
Thank
Let's
you.
move into our comptroller's report,
So you
please.
won't see me.
So there is no monthly report because the month just ended
Newfoundland.
on Saturday, and
I just got back from Alaska for
do the
3
final,
weeks.
Calculation, so I don't have to print out. Once we have, normally it's the second Tuesday of the month, which gives us a week to get the numbers together. So I can get that to you next week. I'll email that report to you. But just to bring you up to date on a couple of things, the orders have been. They were in last week for 3 days, and they're gonna be coming back next week again. I'm not sure whether it's gonna be 2 or 3 days, but it's progressing very favorably. It's progressing at this point. I mean, the order will be completed by December 31st, and actually probably prior to that. We had a van sale today with short-term notes. The new PD was included in that, so it was $22.9 million. Okay, we had that was a rollover of the old bands.
Okay,
Plus
plus the PD.
plus the PD.
Anything else new, or just,
No,
Okay.
well, there was 600,000 for some items that were in the budget, like the road construction. Okay. So on Friday, we had a rating call from Fidelity, and they're concerned about what the government is doing to us, and how would we handle, their concern was $8.2 million. And we identified, different areas where we could, like, the Board of Ed would be 1.3, we had about 600,000, and then we talked about possible, additional billings to the taxpayers, probably in December, maybe January. Overall, it was a good call. They were very happy that the four of us were on the call with them, because normally they're only talking to me. But I wanted to get Terry involved, Matt, and Dr. Carver at the same time. So we had the van sale today. And just a couple of recent sales, on the 27th of September, Wyndham borrowed, and they got a rate of 1.29. And then Ansonia on the 14th also had 1.29.
what do we got?
Our rates, we came in, there was 4 bidders on ours, TD Securities, Eastern Bank, Jeffries, and Oppenheimer. And they broke our offering down into 2 parts, 11.5 million and 11.450. And the first one went for 1.15, and the second one went for 1.19. So they sell that off to Fidelity, and Fidelity sells it to their customers. Eastern Bank was at 1.22, and Jeffries was at 1.26, and then finally Oppenheimer, there's always a higher one, well, the last two are higher, at 1.28. So, I mean, overall, considering the last couple of sales within the last couple of weeks, we're a little bit higher, not much higher, but a little bit higher. We got a very favorable rate, you know, at 1.15 and 1.19. So, we close on that, probably one day next week, and then the money transfers, takes back place on the 17th of October. So, that's about it.
And expenditures, you don't know until next week.
Probably not until next week. I'll send
For
it
the first quarter.
Yeah.
You don't see anything.
It's not gonna be anything drastic. Everything's in line. You know.
So part of this is covering the police station.
Yes, yeah.
You have an update on that, the police station at all?
I mean, the steel is up.
Even if we did, we ain't getting it.
Okay, any questions for Bob?
Just, Bob, we assume our tax collection at like 98.7.
In the budget, it's 98.7.
98.7. Would it be possible or too dangerous, like if we got these cuts, to assume it at like 99 based on historical collection rates, or is that a very
I mean,
dangerous
it's
thing?
possible, but it's very dangerous, because if it doesn't come in at 99, it's been coming in at 99, 99.01 or somewhere around there, but if it doesn't, then all of a sudden we're shortfall.
Supplement, got it.
But I think whatever surplus we might have this year, may be the time to say, take that money and bring it to capital non-recurring or whatever, so that we don't have to fund the budget for the following year to that extent. So if we bring in $750,000 into capital non-recurring, then you may not have to do, you may want to put the roads in anyway, but there may be other items that you can pull back a little bit because you have the money available in capital non-recurring. It's something to think about.
So maintain the fund balance where it is and just,
Yeah,
rather
yeah.
than transferring it.
Exactly,
Where are we in the fund balance right now, percentage-wise?
about 16 million.
So that's percentage-wise, that's probably, God, that's gotta be,
You know, you go to.
that's up there.
It's up there, it closed at around 22%.
I would say it's gotta be
20. Because there's the loans from the utilities.
There's some IOUs in there.
Okay, we've got OPEB, which is other post-employment benefits, that's in there. And that's a substantial dollar amount. And then, any other little transfers between, departments. For instance, transfer station or the paramedics, they owe us money too. So, I mean, you would have to subtract that out when you do the calculation, but those numbers are available right now in the general fund, so it causes the percentage to look very high.
Yeah.
S&P issued a report about a week and a half ago, where they're looking to downgrade a number of towns and cities in Bethel, in the state. And Bethel was listed, they had about 88 towns and cities in there, and we were probably in the top 20 in fund balance amounts.
Yeah, that's up there.
So we're in a pretty good position that way, and that's why the government is looking at the dollars and saying, hey,
Yeah, you're right, yeah. You know, I see what's gonna happen in the budget season, and this is the first I've heard of, well, not the first, but it's the first I've been in a public meeting and hear about, you know, the Board of Ed can find some money, the towns can find some money. You know what I'm gonna be hearing from the taxpayers? How come we're not, how come we're not gonna appreciate that $2 million? Hold on.
Okay.
Well, how come we're not gonna appreciate that $2 million savings in our next budget? That's what they're gonna say. That's what people are gonna say,
our side would include furloughs,
you know?
and that's gonna hurt the
Okay.
employees in town.
I don't know what the Board of Ed side
On their
is.
side, right now, they're not hiring two administrators.
Well, they already
Okay,
instituted
there's
it,
not
right?
teachers being hired.
Well, that's what
The
they
only
just
teachers
said,
that are being
correct.
hired are the ones that are mandated for special ed.
Okay.
Other than that,
So those monies are gonna come back to the town then? If right
we
now?
wind up going to.
If everything works out with the state the way it's supposed to, and we're on the budget that we went with the money, ECS money that we're getting from the state, and we get the $8.2 million, that money would definitely revert back to the general fund. People are gonna be looking for some kind of tax break eventually.
Yeah, I mean.
You know, they're not getting it.
They moved all of their unions over to the partnership plan, which saved them money.
Yeah.
We moved the last one over, not the last one, but the most recent one over, that saved us another $100,000 growth.
And the other thing is, people are gonna start looking at, why do we have, between 18 and 22% in a savings account when we only need 10? Now, do we need 10? Yeah, but that's what people are gonna say. That's what people do say. I'm not gonna say, they do say this.
But if we didn't have the amount
50
of money we have,
I-
in a situation like this, we'd be in a lot of trouble.
I
A
know,
lot of trouble.
but we were in this trouble 8 years ago when we rectified it, you know,
Don't forget-
between the selectmen and the Board of
That's why
Finance.
We're getting hurt at this point.
You
Yeah,
know,
but we're gonna be taking on debt, and some of that money could be used to pay down those short-term bans.
Well,
I mean, that's why you don't
we're
wanna
taking on
dump
debt
this
for
fund
schools, we're
balance. I
taking on
mean,
debt
Yeah.
for-
we're gonna
for
need it.
PD, all right? A lot of it can be short-term, and we can pay that back earlier. So if it's gonna be 42 million, and we pay down with short-term $2 or $4 million.
I brought this up 2 to 3 years ago, and I was shot down on it. The same thing as what you're saying. Why aren't we taking some money out of it, out of the fund balance, and start paying off some of our short-term, high-interest debt? And it was a bad
What's the
idea
high
then.
interest?
It was then. A couple of years ago, it was higher interest than it is now.
No, Tim, 3 years ago, it was 10 basis points. It was nothing.
Well, then it was, but it's not at the time then. It was the debt that we had previous to that. Those were higher rates. There were some that were higher at one time.
The short-term debt gets rolled every time.
Yeah.
So, all right, it was point two, dropped down to .15.
No, I remember what it was down. It was, yeah.
Now it's at.
Where it should be. I know.
It's moving up.
I know.
Well, even this is low.
Yeah,
There's no question it's
well,
low.
historically low.
Yeah.
All right, we are going to have to move for adjournment because the selectmen's meeting comes up at 7 PM. I do appreciate everybody's concerns and their input for tonight. And we will be at the town meeting a week from tonight, and then we will go on from there. Could I have a motion for adjournment?
I'll make a motion.
Excuse me,
Sure.
in accordance with Robert's rules, I want to just say an issue that I think we have to discuss, especially since going into the budget season. I think whenever we do it, I'd like to do it now, but I'm not going to make a motion, to discuss the line item salary question that came up in the budget and with the social services director position. The line item that we approved, that changed. We really need to discuss that so that we know what's going on when we go into budget season.
All right,
It's important.
We will take that under advisement. All right, could I have a second on that motion for adjournment?
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So moved. Thank you very much.